He froze at the bedroom door. The nanny, hired just 2 weeks ago, was asleep in the same bed as his disabled daughter, one protective arm draped over her. No parenting manual would ever recommend that, but what he discovered about her changed everything. Michael Harrison's key turned in the lock at 11:43 on a Tuesday night, 3 hours earlier than anyone expected him home. The Portland rain had grounded his flight to Seattle, forcing him to cancel the merger meeting that could have sealed the biggest deal of his career. He dropped his leather briefcase by the mahogany console, loosened his silk tie, and headed upstairs to check on Emma. His 8-year-old daughter's room glowed with the soft amber light of her nightlight, but what he saw made his breath catch in his throat. There, curled up on the small daybed next to Emma's specialized medical bed, lay the new nanny. Sarah Chen was fast asleep, one hand resting protectively near his daughter's arm, her face peaceful in the dim light. Michael's jaw tightened. This wasn't what he'd paid the prestigious Cascade Care Agency $15,000 to arrange. Professional boundaries existed for a reason. He'd made that crystal clear during the interview process 2 weeks ago. But something stopped him from waking her immediately. Emma looked different. Her usually tense shoulders seemed relaxed, and for the first time in months, she wasn't making those small, distressed sounds that broke his heart every night. The chronic muscle spasms that kept her awake seemed to have disappeared entirely. He backed out of the room quietly, his mind racing. Tomorrow, he would have to address this situation. The agency would need to know about this boundary violation. But tonight, seeing Emma so peaceful, he couldn't bring himself to disturb whatever was happening. Sarah had come with impeccable references. Her pediatric physical therapy credentials from Johns Hopkins were outstanding, and her previous employers couldn't stop praising her dedication. The Cascade Care Agency had called her a miracle worker with special needs children. But sleeping in his daughter's room? That crossed every professional line he could think of. Michael poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat in his home office, staring out at the city lights of downtown Portland. Rain streaked the windows as he tried to make sense of what he'd witnessed. Emma had been struggling since her last nanny, Margaret, left abruptly 3 months ago. The agency said Margaret had a family emergency, but something about her hasty departure never sat right with him. Emma's cerebral palsy had been challenging from birth, but lately her condition seemed to be worsening. The muscle spasms were more frequent, her sleep more disrupted. Dr. Patel had suggested increasing her medication, but Michael hated the idea of pumping more drugs into his little girl's system. Then Sarah arrived 2 weeks ago, and everything changed. Emma's appetite improved. Her physical therapy sessions became less of a battle. Even Emma's mother, Rebecca, had noticed the difference during her weekly video calls from New York, where she'd moved after their divorce became final last year. Michael's phone buzzed. A text from his business partner, James. Flight delayed again. Rescheduling Seattle meeting for Thursday. Don't let this deal slip away, Mike. But for once, Michael wasn't thinking about deals or mergers or stock prices. He was thinking about the woman sleeping in his daughter's room and the questions that were multiplying by the minute. The next morning, Michael deliberately stayed home from the office. He watched from the kitchen doorway as Sarah went through Emma's morning routine. There was something different about her approach, something he couldn't quite identify. Her movements were precise, almost choreographed, as she helped Emma with her exercises. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," Sarah said when she noticed him. "I didn't expect you back so early last night. My flight was cancelled." He kept his voice neutral, professional. "We need to talk." Sarah's face flushed slightly, but she nodded. "Of course. Let me just finish helping Emma with breakfast." Michael watched as Sarah fed his daughter, noting how Emma actually seemed eager for each bite. When had that started? For months, getting Emma to eat had been a struggle that left everyone exhausted and frustrated. "Emma seems more responsive lately," Michael said carefully. "Children often respond well to consistent routines and positive reinforcement," Sarah replied, but something in her tone suggested there was more to the story. After Emma was settled with her morning educational activities, Sarah joined Michael in his office. She sat straight-backed in the leather chair across from his desk, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "I want to explain about last night," she began before he could speak. "Please do." Sarah took a deep breath. "Emma has been having nightmares. Not the typical kind, neurological episodes that seem to trigger her muscle spasms. When I stay close, monitoring her sleep patterns, I can intervene before they escalate." Michael frowned. "Intervene how?" "Gentle repositioning, pressure point therapy, specialized breathing techniques. Nothing invasive, but it requires careful timing and observation." "Are you saying Emma's sleep problems are neurological, not just behavioral?" "I'm saying every child with cerebral palsy presents differently. Emma's particular patterns suggest her brain activity during sleep is triggering physical responses. If we can address the neurological component, the physical symptoms often improve." Michael leaned back in his chair. This wasn't what any of Emma's doctors had told him. "And you learned this technique where?" Sarah hesitated for just a moment. "Advanced pediatric therapy training, specialized coursework." Something about her answer felt incomplete, but before Michael could press further, his phone rang. Dr. Patel's office, calling about Emma's upcoming appointment. "We'll continue this conversation later," Michael said, answering the call. But as Sarah left his office, Michael found himself wondering what exactly he'd stumbled into. The improvement in Emma was undeniable, but Sarah's techniques sounded like nothing he'd heard from medical professionals. He made a mental note to research her background more thoroughly. That afternoon, Michael cancelled 3 meetings and worked from home, observing Sarah's interactions with Emma. What he witnessed challenged everything he thought he knew about his daughter's condition. During Emma's scheduled physical therapy session, Sarah used movements that looked almost like dance. Her hands moved in fluid patterns around Emma's body, never quite touching but somehow guiding Emma's own movements. It was beautiful to watch, but completely unlike any therapy Michael had ever seen. Emma's response was extraordinary. The child who usually cried during physical therapy was actually smiling. Her movements, typically jerky and uncontrolled, seemed smoother, more coordinated. "What kind of technique is that?" Michael asked when the session ended. "Neuroplasticity-based movement therapy," Sarah replied. "It's based on the principle that the brain can form new neural pathways when stimulated correctly." Michael's business mind kicked in. "Is this FDA approved? Part of standard medical protocols?" Sarah's pause lasted a beat too long. "It's based on emerging research. Some of the most effective treatments aren't yet widely recognized by traditional medical establishments." Red flags went up in Michael's mind, but he couldn't argue with the results. Emma was more engaged, more responsive than she'd been in months. Whatever Sarah was doing, it was working. That evening, Michael made a decision that would change everything. Instead of confronting Sarah about sleeping in Emma's room, he decided to watch and wait. He installed a discreet baby monitor system that would let him observe from his bedroom. What he witnessed over the next week shook him to his core. Sarah wasn't just monitoring Emma's sleep, she was orchestrating an intricate treatment protocol that continued throughout the night. Every few hours, she would perform subtle movements around Emma's bed, her hands tracing patterns in the air, while she whispered what sounded like counting sequences. Emma's physical responses were immediate and positive. The muscle spasms that had plagued her for months virtually disappeared. Her sleep became deep and restful. During the day, her cognitive responses improved dramatically. Michael found himself in uncharted territory. As a successful tech entrepreneur, he'd built his career on data, evidence, and proven methodologies. But the evidence in front of him suggested that Sarah's unconventional approach was achieving results that traditional medicine had failed to deliver. His concern deepened when he tried researching Sarah's background more thoroughly. Her credentials checked out, but there were gaps in her employment history that the agency couldn't adequately explain. More troubling, when he called Johns Hopkins to verify her advanced training, they had no record of the specific neuroplasticity program she'd mentioned. The questions multiplied when Emma had her monthly checkup with Dr. Patel. The pediatric neurologist was amazed by Emma's improvement, but couldn't explain it based on the treatment protocols they'd been following. "Has anything changed in Emma's routine?" Dr. Patel asked. "Different medications, therapy techniques, environmental factors." Michael found himself in the uncomfortable position of lying to Emma's doctor. "We have a new nanny. She's very dedicated, follows all the protocols carefully." But Dr. Patel's puzzled expression suggested he knew something wasn't adding up. "These improvements are remarkable, but they don't align with Emma's previous trajectory. I'd like to schedule additional tests to understand what's happening neurologically." Walking out of the medical office, Michael realized he was protecting Sarah without fully understanding why. The rational part of his mind screamed that he should demand complete transparency, involve Emma's medical team, follow proper protocols. But the father in him couldn't ignore that Emma was thriving for the first time in her young life. That night, he made another discovery that changed everything. While reviewing security footage from his home office camera, he noticed Sarah had been accessing his computer late at night. His blood ran cold until he realized what she was actually doing. Sarah was documenting Emma's progress in meticulous detail. Charts, graphs, video recordings, detailed notes about every technique she used, and Emma's responses. It wasn't corporate espionage, it was scientific documentation more thorough than anything he'd seen from Emma's medical team. But the files were encrypted, stored in a hidden folder structure that suggested technical sophistication far beyond what a typical nanny would possess. Whatever Sarah was doing, she was documenting it with the precision of a researcher conducting a clinical trial. Michael's hands shook as he realized the implications. Either Sarah was running some kind of unauthorized experiment on his daughter, or she was pioneering a treatment that could revolutionize care for children with cerebral palsy. The question was, which scenario terrified him more? His phone rang at midnight. Rebecca calling from New York. "Michael, I need to ask you something about Emma's last video call," his ex-wife said without preamble. She seemed different, more alert, more responsive. "What's changed?" Michael stared out his office window at the Portland skyline, knowing that his next words would determine not just Emma's future, but the trajectory of their entire family. "Rebecca, we need to talk." "Rebecca, I hired a private investigator." The words hung in the air between Portland and New York like a confession. Michael could hear his ex-wife's sharp intake of breath through the phone. "You what? Michael, what's going on? Is Emma in danger?" "No, maybe. I don't know anymore." Michael ran his hand through his hair, exhaustion weighing on every word. "The new nanny, Sarah. There's something she's not telling us, but Emma is improving in ways that shouldn't be possible. Start from the beginning." So he did. Michael told Rebecca everything. The midnight discovery, the unconventional techniques, the mysterious documentation, the lies to Dr. Patel. With each detail, the situation sounded more surreal, more impossible to explain. "You're telling me our daughter is being treated with some kind of experimental therapy by a nanny who may not even be qualified?" Rebecca's voice rose with each word. "Michael, are you insane? Look at the video calls. Look at Emma's responses. When has she ever been this engaged, this happy?" Silence stretched between them. Rebecca had noticed the changes. They were impossible to miss. Emma's eyes were brighter, her movements more purposeful, her communication attempts more frequent. "I'm flying to Portland tomorrow," Rebecca finally said. "Whatever's happening, we need answers." After the call ended, Michael sat in the darkness of his office, knowing that tomorrow would bring a reckoning. Rebecca's arrival would force decisions he wasn't ready to make. But first, he needed to understand exactly who Sarah Chen really was. The private investigator, David Walsh, had been working Michael's case for 3 days. His preliminary report arrived at 6 a.m. via encrypted email, and what Michael read made his blood run cold. Sarah Chen didn't exist. Not officially, anyway. The woman caring for Emma had a legitimate nursing license and physical therapy credentials, but her employment history was a carefully constructed fiction. The previous positions listed on her resume, the employers had no record of her. The advanced training certificates, the institutions couldn't verify them, but the deeper David dug, the more interesting the story became. Sarah Chen was an alias. Her real name was Sarah Lin, and she was wanted for questioning by the Oregon State Board of Health for practicing experimental treatments without proper authorization. The investigation revealed a network of families whose children had experienced miraculous improvements under Sarah's care, but who had signed strict non-disclosure agreements to protect her from regulatory scrutiny. These parents formed an underground support system, sharing information and resources, while maintaining absolute secrecy about Sarah's methods. Michael's hands trembled as he read testimonial after testimonial. Children who had been vegetative were now responsive. Kids who couldn't walk were taking their first steps. Families who had been told to accept their children's limitations were witnessing transformations that defied medical explanation. But there was another side to the story that made Michael's stomach drop. Sarah's younger sister, Lily, had been her first patient. Born with severe brain damage, Lily had been given no hope of normal development. Sarah's revolutionary treatment had worked so well that Lily was now a functioning teenager. But the medical establishment refused to acknowledge the success. Sarah had been pursuing official clinical trials for years, but regulatory barriers and institutional skepticism had blocked her path. Desperate to help other children, she had gone underground, working as a nanny to gain access to the kids who needed her most. The cost of this deception was devastating. Sarah was drowning in debt from Lily's ongoing care, legal fees from fighting regulatory challenges, and the financial strain of working for nanny wages instead of her true professional value. She was sacrificing everything to help children that the medical system had written off. Michael closed the laptop and stared at the wall. He was harboring a fugitive from medical authority, a woman who was either a dangerous quack or a pioneering genius. The evidence suggested she might be both. His phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Landing at PDX at 2 p.m. We need to talk before I see Emma." At noon, Michael found Sarah in Emma's room, conducting what looked like a normal play session. But now he could see the subtle precision in every interaction, the way Sarah's movements guided Emma through exercises, disguised as games. "Sarah, we need to talk." She looked up from where she was sitting on the floor with Emma, and Michael saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there before: fear. "Emma, sweetheart, can you practice your letters while I talk to your daddy?" Sarah handed Emma an adaptive tablet designed for children with motor difficulties. In his office, Sarah sat rigidly in the same chair where they'd had their first conversation 2 weeks ago, but everything had changed since then. "I know who you are," Michael said quietly. Sarah's face went pale, but she didn't deny it. "How much do you know?" "Enough. Sarah Lynn, not Chen. The Oregon Health Board. The underground network of families. Your sister, Lily." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, but she maintained her composure. "Are you going to turn me in?" "That depends on what you tell me right now. The complete truth." Sarah took a shuddering breath and began to speak. What she revealed over the next hour changed Michael's understanding of everything he thought he knew about medicine, healing, and the courage required to challenge established systems. "My sister was born with catastrophic brain damage. The doctors said she would never walk, never talk, never have any quality of life. They recommended we let her die peacefully." Sarah's voice was steady, but tears streamed down her face as she continued. "I was 19 studying pre-med, and I couldn't accept that. I started researching neuroplasticity, studying cases of people who had recovered from supposedly permanent brain damage. I learned about techniques being developed in research labs, but not yet available to patients. She had spent 6 years developing a treatment protocol that combined elements of traditional physical therapy with cutting-edge neuroscience research. Working with Lily, she had achieved results that seemed impossible. Lily started responding within months. By age 5, she was walking. By 10, she was talking. She's 15 now and attends regular high school classes. But when I tried to publish our results, the medical establishment dismissed them as anecdotal evidence. The regulatory barriers were crushing. Clinical trials required funding. Sarah couldn't access, institutional support she couldn't obtain, and years of bureaucratic processes while children suffered and families lost hope. I started working as a nanny because it was the only way to help kids who needed treatment immediately. I document everything meticulously, building a database that will eventually support proper research. But every day I wait, children miss critical developmental windows. Michael absorbed this information, his business mind automatically calculating risks and opportunities. "How many children have you treated?" 43 over the past 4 years. 38 have shown significant improvement. 5 cases were too severe or started too late for my methods to be effective. The success rate was extraordinary, far better than conventional treatments. But the legal and ethical implications were staggering. "The families who work with me understand the risks," Sarah continued. "They've exhausted traditional options and chosen to try something different. We're not rejecting medical care. We're supplementing it with techniques that should be available but aren't." Michael's phone chimed with a text from Rebecca. "Landed early. On my way. My ex-wife will be here in an hour. She wants answers, and she has every right to them. What do I tell her? Sarah stood up, her decision already made. Tell her the truth. I'll pack my things and be gone before she arrives. Emma should continue with traditional therapies. The improvements we've achieved should last, but she'll need ongoing support. Wait, the word came out harder than Michael intended. You're just going to leave after everything Emma has accomplished? Mr. Harrison, I can't involve your family in my legal problems. The health board investigation is intensifying. If they connect me to Emma's case, you could face charges for allowing unlicensed treatment. Michael thought about Emma's smile that morning, the way she had reached for her juice cup without assistance, the first full sentence she'd spoken in months. What if there was another way? Sarah looked at him questioningly, but before either could speak, they heard a car door slam in the driveway. Rebecca had arrived. Through the office window, Michael watched his ex-wife stride up the front walkway with the determined pace he remembered from their marriage. Rebecca was brilliant, methodical, and absolutely ruthless when protecting Emma. The next conversation would determine whether Sarah Lynn disappeared from their lives forever or became part of something bigger. She's here, Michael said. Sarah nodded, her face resolute. I understand. I'll tell Emma I have to leave for a family emergency. She's heard that before. But Michael was already shaking his head. An idea was forming, dangerous and expensive and possibly brilliant. No. You're going to tell Rebecca everything you just told me, every detail. Mr. Harrison, that's not wise. Your ex-wife will... Rebecca is a medical malpractice attorney, Sarah. One of the best in the country. If anyone can figure out how to legitimize what you're doing, it's her. The front door opened, and Rebecca's voice carried through the house. Michael, where are you? Sarah's eyes widened as she understood the implications. Michael wasn't just protecting her secret anymore. He was about to bet everything on the possibility that 3 adults who loved Emma could find a way to change the system instead of just hiding from it. Emma's upstairs, Michael called back. We'll be right there. He looked at Sarah one more time. Are you ready to stop running and start fighting? Before Sarah could answer, Emma's voice echoed from upstairs, clearer and stronger than they'd ever heard it. Mommy! Mommy's home! Rebecca's sharp intake of breath was audible from the foyer. In 8 years, Emma had never spontaneously called out to anyone. Michael and Sarah exchanged a look that acknowledged the moment of truth had arrived. Whatever happened next would determine not just Emma's future, but the fate of every child who might benefit from treatments that existed in the shadows of medical bureaucracy. She's going to have questions, Michael said. I have answers, Sarah replied, but her voice shook with uncertainty. They could hear Rebecca's footsteps on the stairs, moving toward Emma's room. In moments, she would witness her daughter's transformation firsthand, and then the real conversation would begin. Michael's phone buzzed with a text from David Walsh. Found something big. Sarah Lynn isn't the only one. There's a whole network of practitioners using similar methods, and some very powerful people want them stopped. The stakes had just gotten higher than Michael had imagined. This wasn't just about one nanny and one little girl anymore. This was about a battle between innovation and tradition, hope and bureaucracy that could reshape healthcare for an entire generation of children. From upstairs came the sound of Rebecca's voice, thick with emotion. Emma, baby, how are you talking so clearly? And Emma's response, proud and joyful. Sarah taught me. Michael looked at Sarah one last time. Welcome to the fight of your life. Rebecca stood frozen in Emma's doorway, watching their daughter attempt to build a tower with blocks that required fine motor skills she'd never possessed. Emma's movements were deliberate, coordinated, nothing like the jerky motions that had defined her condition since birth. Daddy, look! Emma held up her creation, a wobbly but recognizable tower 6 blocks high. I made it myself. I see that, sweetheart. It's beautiful. Michael's voice caught in his throat as he entered the room with Sarah beside him. Rebecca's attorney instincts kicked in immediately. Her eyes moved from Emma to Sarah, cataloging every detail, every inconsistency. You must be the new nanny. I'm Rebecca, Emma's mother. Sarah Lynn, she said, deliberately using her real name. And we need to talk. The 3 adults spent the next hour in Michael's office while Emma napped, her most peaceful sleep in months. Sarah laid out everything, her real identity, her revolutionary techniques, the underground network, the legal risks. Rebecca listened with the focused intensity that had made her one of New York's most feared medical malpractice attorneys. "So you're telling me," Rebecca said when Sarah finished, "that you've essentially been conducting unauthorized clinical trials using our daughter as a test subject?" Sarah winced. "That's one way to look at it. It's the only way a prosecutor would look at it." Rebecca's voice was ice-cold professional. "You could face criminal charges. We could face charges for allowing it." "Rebecca," Michael interjected, "look at Emma. Look at what Sarah has achieved." "I am looking. And what I see is miraculous progress that could disappear the moment Sarah is arrested, which seems inevitable, given what you've told me." Sarah spoke quietly. "Mrs. Harrison, I understand your concerns. I've taken enormous risks, and I've involved your family without your full knowledge. But Emma wasn't getting better with conventional treatment. She was getting worse." Rebecca stood and walked to the window, her legal mind processing implications and possibilities. "How many other practitioners are there? People using methods like yours?" "At least 12 that I know of, maybe more. We don't communicate directly. It's too dangerous. But the results speak for themselves." "And the authorities are cracking down?" Sarah nodded. 3 colleagues have been shut down in the past 6 months. One is facing criminal charges in California. The medical establishment sees us as a threat to their authority." Rebecca turned back to face them, and Michael recognized the expression on her face. She was shifting from protective mother to strategic attorney. "What you need is legal protection and institutional support. What you have is a network of desperate parents and practitioners working in the shadows." "Exactly," Michael said, "which is why I think we should go public." Both women stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. "Think about it," Michael continued, his business instincts taking over. "Sarah has documented results from 43 cases. We have video evidence of Emma's progress. Rebecca has the legal expertise to navigate regulatory challenges. I have the financial resources and business connections to build institutional support." "You're talking about taking on the entire medical establishment," Rebecca said. "I'm talking about giving them a choice. Embrace innovation or be left behind by it." Sarah shook her head. "The risks are too great. If we fail, not only do I lose my ability to help children, but families like yours face prosecution for allowing experimental treatment." Michael's phone buzzed with another message from David Walsh. "Urgent. Health board raid scheduled for tomorrow. Multiple locations. Sarah Lynn is primary target." He showed the message to Rebecca and Sarah. The room went silent as the implications sank in. "They're moving faster than we thought," Rebecca said. "Sarah, you have maybe 12 hours before this all comes crashing down." Sarah stood up, her decision made. "Then I need to disappear tonight. I've prepared for this. I have documents that will allow me to relocate and start over somewhere else." "Running isn't going to solve anything," Michael said. "They'll find you eventually, and more children will suffer while you're hiding." "What are you suggesting?" Rebecca asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "We fight. Tonight. We contact every family in Sarah's network, every practitioner who's willing to come forward, every journalist who will listen. We turn this into a public battle instead of a private prosecution." Sarah looked terrified. "That's career suicide. Professional destruction." "Maybe," Rebecca said thoughtfully, "or maybe it's the only way to force systemic change. Michael's right about one thing. Hiding in the shadows isn't sustainable, but going public is incredibly dangerous." Michael's mind was racing through possibilities, calculating odds and strategies the way he did with business deals. David Walsh has been investigating Sarah, but he's also uncovered the network of families. What if we flip the script? Instead of hiding the evidence, we release everything at once. A coordinated media blitz, Rebecca mused, before the authorities can control the narrative. Sarah was shaking her head. "You don't understand what you're risking. These regulatory bodies have enormous power. They can destroy careers, impose massive fines, even pursue criminal charges." "And you don't understand what we're gaining," Michael replied. "Emma has a chance at a normal life. So do dozens of other children. That's worth fighting for." Rebecca pulled out her phone. "I know people at the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, medical journalists who've been looking for stories exactly like this." "Wait," Sarah said urgently. "There's something else you need to know. The reason the crackdown is happening now isn't just regulatory zealousness. There are pharmaceutical companies that see our methods as a threat to their business model. She explained how traditional cerebral palsy treatments focused on managing symptoms rather than addressing underlying neurological dysfunction. The medications, equipment, and ongoing therapies generated billions in revenue annually. What I do costs almost nothing but produces better results than treatments that cost hundreds of thousands per patient. That makes me a threat to some very powerful interests. Michael felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just about medical bureaucracy anymore. This was about economic warfare between entrenched interests and disruptive innovation. All the more reason to go public, Rebecca said. Once the story breaks, it becomes much harder for them to make you disappear quietly. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes. My sister Lily doesn't know about the investigation. She thinks I'm just a nanny who helps special needs kids on weekends. If this goes public, she'll learn that everything we've built could collapse. Or she'll learn that her sister is a hero who refused to let broken systems prevent her from helping children, Michael said gently. A sound from upstairs interrupted their conversation. Emma's voice, calling out clearly, "Where is everyone? I want to show Mommy my new words." Rebecca's breath caught. Emma had never initiated social interaction so clearly before. The three adults looked at each other, understanding that this moment crystallized everything they were fighting for. "I need to make some calls," Rebecca said, pulling out her phone. "If we're doing this, we have 6 hours to coordinate everything." Over the next few hours, Rebecca worked her media contacts, while Michael reached out to his network of investors and business leaders who might support medical innovation. Sarah made the hardest calls of all, contacting families in her network to warn them about the impending raid and asking if they'd be willing to go public with their stories. The response was overwhelming. Parents who had been hiding their children's miraculous improvements were ready to stand up and fight. Other practitioners agreed to come forward despite the risks. Journalists smelled the story of a lifetime. By midnight, they had commitments from major media outlets, statements from 15 families, and documentation from 8 practitioners. Rebecca had lawyers standing by in multiple states. Michael had arranged funding for legal defense and research initiatives. But Sarah was struggling with the decision that would change everything. "Once we do this, there's no going back," she said, as they finalized plans in Michael's office. "Win or lose, my life as I know it ends tomorrow. Your life as you know it already ended when you chose to help Emma," Michael replied. "The question is whether it ends with you hiding in fear or standing up for what you believe in." At 2 a.m., Emma woke up and called for Sarah. As Sarah helped her daughter with a middle-of-the-night bathroom visit, Rebecca watched the interaction that would have been impossible just weeks earlier. "She trusts Sarah completely," Rebecca whispered to Michael. "Look at how comfortable Emma is, how natural their communication seems." Michael nodded. "Whatever happens tomorrow, Sarah gave us our daughter back." When Sarah returned from Emma's room, she found Michael and Rebecca waiting with determined expressions. "We've made our decision," Rebecca said. "The media blitz starts at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. By the time the health board begins their raids, the story will already be breaking nationwide." Sarah took a deep breath, thinking about Lily, about all the children she'd helped, about the families who were counting on her. "What do you need me to do?" "Be brave," Michael said. "Tell your story. Trust that people will recognize the truth when they see it." At dawn, as news crews arrived at the Harrison house and similar scenes played out across the country, Sarah stood in Emma's room, watching her former patient sleep peacefully. In a few hours, Emma would wake up to a world where her miraculous recovery was national news, where her father and mother were fighting battles that would reshape pediatric medicine. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "Saw the news. I'm so proud of you. Come home when you can." Michael appeared in the doorway. "Ready?" Sarah looked at Emma one more time, then at the man who had chosen to risk everything to protect her work. "Ready." As they walked toward the living room where cameras were waiting, Sarah realized she wasn't running anymore. For the first time in years, she was moving towards something instead of away from it. The battle that would determine the future of medical innovation was about to begin, and at its center was a little girl whose impossible recovery had sparked a revolution. Outside, news vans lined the street. and Sarah's phone was buzzing with messages from practitioners, parents, and supporters around the world. The underground network she'd built in shadow was about to step into the light. Whatever happened next, Emma Harrison would never be just another case study again. She was the living proof that sometimes the greatest discoveries come not from institutional laboratories, but from the desperate love of people who refuse to accept that healing has limits. Michael squeezed Sarah's hand as they approached the cameras. "Thank you for giving us hope," Sarah smiled, thinking of all the children whose lives might change because 3 adults decided to fight for what was right instead of what was safe. "Thank you for believing in miracles." The cameras rolled, the story broke worldwide, and the revolution began with a single question from the first reporter. "Can you tell us about Emma?" And Sarah Lynn began to speak,